actually, when we talk about consciousness, that is generally a topic that would be talked about in kind of the beginning when one is getting introduced to the Dhamma. But
Okay.
when they get kind of the picture of what's going on, and the student really gets into the practice so that they can actually see what we're talking about, that's when it's a good idea to revisit it so that they can actually see what we're talking about. And that the Buddha was actually is impressive in that he was quite hard on Sati, son of a fisherman, when Sati was saying that consciousness is that which runs from this life to that life, experience the result of good and past actions, good and bad actions from the past. And the Buddha says, no, not only is it just simply no, but holding that belief that there is something like consciousness or a me that goes from life to life is really missing out on it. That not only is that consciousness or that self not permanent, but that it is in fact the worst of all cases dependent. It's dependently arising. It's not independent. We have the idea once that I'm born and maybe out of diapers, now I'm independent. And we forget that no, we're completely interdependent and dependent upon all kinds of things and in all ways, but especially consciousness itself is dependently arising and is not there all the time. That and that when we begin to have a mind that's really sharp, we can actually see that. But there are some things that we can do that help the individual begin to understand that.
Okay.
And one of the ways that I would say that is by it's actually an interesting task to perform, is get something on the screen that you like to read, that you know that you're going to be interested in, and that can keep your attention focused on it. And then set that aside and now go find a video or an audio recording or a talk or something that's on a completely different topic that you like to hear, and that you know that you'll be interested in hearing this. And now let that continue and bring back on the screen that which you intended to read, so that now you're listening to something that you want to listen to, and you want to read something that you want to, and you're reading something that you want to read. And what will happen is consciousness will move back and forth between eye consciousness and ear consciousness, and by doing so, we lose our perception. The perception will break down. It will be going good for this, and then we're over here, and now we've got this to do. And so that switch. This is a really good teacher to try to do two things at once with consciousness, as opposed to doing two things with the body. Which is one of the ways of doing that, like rubbing your stomach and patting your head at the same time. And then you pat your stomach and rub your head at the same time. Okay. So now you're rubbing both, but yeah. And you can get into it. You rub one and then you pat the other, but now you've got the rhythm going, and the training is done inside the body itself. But what we're talking about here is getting the perception and the consciousness on that object of listening and reading something completely different. And you'll find that at first you're disconcerted. It's almost like once you throw one of them out and bring the other one in, that you've kind of lost that other one. And so when you throw this one out and bring the old one back in, it's almost like you're lost now. But you can get over that so that you can begin to take care of more than one thing at a time. In other words, you can bring into your awareness without them becoming distractions.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we also begin to understand, really, though, I can only do one thing at a time. I can't really listen and read or watch
Mm-hmm.
exactly at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
When we put that together, then we can start watching a video and realize that sometimes we're listening to the dialogue and sometimes we're looking at the screen.
Mm-hmm.
But that we can't do both, but we can go back and forth, and that's what kind of makes it entertaining, is that mixing when we're moving consciousness back and forth. So that's why I would recommend, know what we're going to do is we're going to get an audio, this one thing, and the video, which is completely something else, and begin to watch how the eyes will stop at a place so that you can listen. But the
Mm-hmm.
listening continues on unless you actually stop and go back and re-listen to something. But with the reading, you can stop and then start it again, and then stop and start
Mm-hmm.
again. There's various aspects of that
Mm-hmm.
consciousness. And what we realize then is, in fact, that consciousness is not a stream. There is no such thing as a
Mm-hmm.
stream of consciousness. It's more like that. It's like rain.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
more
that's
like
quite a good
rain.
analogy.
Yeah, that rain doesn't come down in a stream; it comes down in multiple drops.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so consciousness is like a drop of water that falls, and then another drop here, there, and yon, and in fact, they're based upon the senses.
Mm-hmm.
And so that drop quality also, I have the story about when I was 6 years old. My dad was a projectionist at a movie theater, not just one, but I saw all the projection booths in every theater in
Okay.
town. And they all had the same process in common. Now, this is back in the early 1950s, to where they had a very, very bright light called an arc light that was
Okay.
steady for about 20 minutes, which was also the time that they would have one reel.
Mm-hmm.
And so there would be a 20-minute, and then there would be a changeover so that the guy who was running the projection could get the third reel into the machine
Mm-hmm.
and put in a new arc light so that 20 minutes later he can make that switch over and
Mm-hmm.
turn this projector on and turn that one off. Okay. So during that time, though, in that 20-minute period on that roll of film, there's going to be literally thousands of images.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when those images are projected on the screen, it looks like a fluid motion,
Mm-hmm.
to where, in fact, that's not the case. That the light stream, in fact, is interrupted in those old machines by a giant fan-like device that turned around.
Mm-hmm.
That's very much like this, that you can see now, and now you can't, and now you can, and
Mm-hmm.
now you can't, and now you can, like
Yeah,
that, as that thing spin around.
yeah, because otherwise, if it would, you'd see the continuous motion, it would be a blur because the frames would blur together. So in each frame, one after the other.
Yes, exactly. So when that thing is turned off, that's when you hear the flicker of the machine moving the film just one frame.
Mm-hmm.
And then they show another image and then they turn it off again. This is 24 times a second. In the really old days, like 1910, they ran at 10 frames a second, which then would cause a flicker. The old flicker in
Uh-huh.
movies
Mm-hmm.
was because there's not enough frames, and you can see that flicker on and off.
Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting. At about 10 frames a second, or once every tenth of a second, is about the best we can do for processing anything. All right, which means at 24 frames a second, it looks like continuous motion
Mm-hmm.
to the eye mind complex. To where, in fact, looking at the machine and how the machine actually delivers it, you can say, no, this is 24 frames that were shown still,
Mm-hmm.
followed by a short time, followed by another frame.
Mm-hmm.
And that there was a time when there was nothing happening.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we mean in the Buddhist term of sunyata.
Okay.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
when consciousness is not there, do you know that? And you're
Mm-hmm.
beginning to say, yes, I can tell there's a gap in this consciousness. It's very fast, maybe at
Yeah.
about 10 frames a second or so, but there is something happening inside the mind, and then unless we start paying attention to it, we're not going to catch it at all, and we think that consciousness is streaming. Where in
Mm.
fact, no, it's intermittent at best,
Yeah.
but also, luckily enough, unremitting.
Hmm. Yeah, I've noticed this first time non-conceptually when doing walking meditation. So I
Hmm.
was focusing, I was trying to catch a lot of detail in the soles of the feet or just in the foot. And I noticed that I was walking, and when I had that clear detail in the foot, I wasn't actually seeing, like I had the conceptual image or a memory of what I saw before, but I wasn't actually getting any new visual stimulus. It was just like the old image in my head, like, yeah, this, I had kind of had the map in my mind, but there was no seeing because I was so focused on the foot. Okay, that's strange. Am I walking without seeing? And when constantly, oh yeah, I'm not seeing. I'm remembering the last frame I saw, actually, the visual frame. And then I saw it when switching from foot to foot, because again, I wasn't feeling both feet. I was just feeling mostly one foot or one area of the foot, and the foot that I was stepping on. And though I had the general feeling of both feet, in that moment where the sensation was present, there was actually no other sensation from the other foot. It was just, yeah, that was the initial effect. And sometimes
That's
I
an
notice.
interesting way of getting it started, is with
Mhm.
that type of walking meditation. Let me ask you this question. When
Okay.
you're doing that, are you wearing shoes?
No, I'm yeah,
You're
barefoot.
doing it barefoot. Okay. And so, what about the consciousness then of watching where your foot is going to land, or noticing your path, or the visual part of that? Because if you're out there walking barefoot, especially now, it's possible to get a frame
Mhm.
that they have those frames at a lot of different monasteries, and sometimes the frames start with nothing but just two trees, or
Okay.
maybe a stick in the ground and a tree at the other. But they can become very formalized. I've even seen them with concrete, that they have a
Okay.
little strip of concrete down about 20 meters and then more concrete, and they fill it with sand or something that the dirt is different than in other walking meditation paths. But really, the walking meditation that the monks do every morning on Bendabat is just out. It doesn't have that
Okay.
boundary. It's just going out. And so, walking barefoot along the road. I learned all about walking meditation, though I had practiced it so much in India doing Mahasi. But I learned about what walking meditation was when I went out on Bendabat with Ajahn Po.
Okay.
He, he would find a gravel road that had the biggest pieces of gravel that he could find. And also, sometimes the paths would be slippery in the mornings because of the
Okay.
dew or the rain
Hmm.
or whatever. I mean, it was literally an obstacle course. And on top of that, during the rains, required to carry an umbrella. Now,
Hmm.
most modern monks' bowls that you will see
And they
will
have a
have
cover,
a
or?
bowl bag, not just the
Hmm.
lid or the cover, but a bowl
Okay.
bag. And sometimes they're knitted quite beautiful with a stand and all of that kind of stuff.
Okay.
All right. Achan Po would not allow the bowl to be put in a bag. So what I did was secretly took a white string and had little tiny holes drilled. So at least I had that. Actually, it was a dirty white string. It fit in with the robe, but he saw it immediately. I did not even get one bend about out of that string I put on that bowl. No, you've got to carry the thing. You got to carry the bowl in a certain kind of way and then carry the umbrella, except that when it's time for the bowl to be open, you've got to manipulate both the umbrella and the lid of the bowl to open the bowl and present the bowl
Hmm.
for filling. and then put the lid back on the bowl while you're still holding the umbrella. And doing this in public. So I actually cheated because I went to practice privately after I saw that I couldn't do it the first time. I actually practiced it at home or in the kuti. Can I actually hold this bowl, take that umbrella, holding it up, and take the lid off the bowl, and then put the lid back on the bowl and continue to hold the umbrella without making an absolute idiot out of myself. But anyway, this is back to the walking meditation, because doing all of that while barefoot out in a literally landmine filled area. I mean, this is like boot camp for Buddhist monks. Wish I'd have had a better attitude about it than I do now. So, anyway, walking meditation, that's part of it, is to note where you're walking, to note where you're putting that foot.
Mm-hmm.
But now, what we're actually doing with the walking meditation, you see, when we're sitting in meditation in the hall, sitting down with the body not moving, the eyes closed, it's supposedly quiet. The kitchen, even if it's cooking food, is way, way over there someplace, and you don't smell what they're doing. And so you're left with, in a way, a kind of sensory deprivation.
Mm-hmm.
And this is so that the student can begin to watch what the mind is doing, start paying attention to that sensory input. That's the only thing that we have is an input for the consciousness. Oh, wish that were true. Oh, no, sorry, that body breathes. That body wiggles around. There is rising, falling, touching, sitting. So, in fact, working with the mind, we also have to work with the body. But on walking meditation, we have to open up the body and the eye door, the senses. We start looking at where we're walking and other things like that. And so it becomes much more of a being able to manage a lot of stuff, being able to have the consciousness move back and forth around to get it fluid, that it doesn't just get stuck on off, but it becomes, okay, now that I know that it's off a lot of the time, let's be able to start to manage it. And one of the ways of doing that is by learning to read and listen to something simultaneously, or let us say, even though we're not paying attention to both of them simultaneously, there they are. There they are.
Okay.
And the simultaneous is not. It's going to be back and forth and back and forth and back and forth with consciousness. Now, there's another part of that, which we would say a deeper object then, or a deeper practice, would come to making sure that we're not taking any objects at all or processing. This would be truly what we would call choiceless awareness, but not the kind that beginners practice, but this would rather be the kind that we mean by no object. That as soon as the eye catches an object, we move. As soon as the thumbs catch an object, of twirling the thumbs, or you hear something with your ear, like a machine buzzing or whatever it is, we don't even take that long. We just keep moving, keep floating, keep the consciousness moving among the senses, and within one sense, moving around to various things. That's a kind of a deeper practice, because that really does take attention to recognize that we are paying attention to something and we better stop it. And so this is the deeper level of sunyata. But all of this has to do with the practice, literally, of basically, let me see if I can say it this way, doing this while the mind is got the jhana factors of first jhana collected together, We don't have to go all the way into fourth jhana, but yet we're doing the kinds of things that can be done, or let us say, the rationale or the reason or the value in the fourth jhana.
Mm-hmm.
And in this way, we can actually, and it's referred to as the Vipassana jhanas, in the sense that you're getting the benefit and the value of the fourth jhana without the arduous work of getting the mind that way.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how that's accomplished, in the sense that we can make intellectual sense out of not taking an object. And so by not taking an object, that means that we're now not giving the perception machine much input,
Uh-huh.
or that we're giving it so much input that it can't process. Either way that we think about it, this is what's happening. So that we begin to make a separation in the mind between perception and consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So consciousness is bare knowing, perception is what we do with it. We
Mm-hmm.
manufacture something out of it, and the parts of the manufacture have to come out of our sankara or out of our past.
Mm-hmm.
So basically what we're saying is this is one way of really, really being in the present moment, because we're not even using our past well enough to even make sense or understand the present moment.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
We're just letting it be without trying to make sense out of it or trying to understand it. Hello, kitty. Hello. So, this leads to what is in the suttas referred to wrongly as infinite consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not infinite. What we're talking is the word boundless is what we're looking at. And what we mean by boundless doesn't mean that it goes way out over there. Boundless just means that we're looking at the boundary between consciousness and perception.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right, that the boundary that we're looking at now is the boundary of what is consciousness and just consciousness. So when consciousness now is unbound from perception, the process of the unbinding of consciousness is just consciousness.
Okay.
And that we're doing very, very little perception. Basically, the only perception that we're doing is the perception is this is consciousness. But that's about the only thing that we've got. This is why that state is called neither perception nor non-perception, is because the perception is so weak that the only thing that we're perceiving is this boundary with consciousness, which is not taking any objects. And so therefore there's no real fodder for perception.
But right now you talked about neither perception or non-perception. I think that's the fourth formless jhana or formless realm. So there was the boundless space, or then boundless consciousness, and then there was maybe nothingness, the perception, and then it was neither perception or non-perception, or was it reversed? I forgot how it was there.
You can do that when the state of boundless space. Thanks for bringing that up. Basically, what that means is that our perception of the body begins to weaken. And because the weakening is there, the boundary between what is the body and what is not the body becomes very weak. That the boundary for where is the arm and where is the air on the arm becomes an interchange, or let us say like in Korea, they have an area that's neither North Korea nor South Korea. It's called a no man's land. Okay. Well, you can also think of it because many border towns are like this, that when you get to that border town, everyone in that town is actually ignores the boundary between those two countries. In Thailand, there's a city called Surin that's like that. that Surin is a border town, is a city in Thailand, but it's also a city in Cambodia.
Mm-hmm.
But because it's a city, the people who live in that city go back and forth. They don't see, there becomes
Mm-hmm.
no boundary for them. All right. That's how we begin with the arm, that the arm starts to lose its fixed boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
The body can feel like it's floating. It can feel like a blob rather than, you see, with our proprioceptive perception system,
Mm-hmm.
that we know exactly where each finger is. All you have to do is put your consciousness on that finger, and the perception will be exactly where it is because it's using that proprioceptive sensing system.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but that can get very weak, and so we feel like a blob, or we feel like we're a big statue, 60 feet high.
Yeah.
These are the kinds of things that will happen when people are entering into and abiding in the fourth jhana.
Mm-hmm.
But we can get those kind of feelings and sensations in the first jhana. We know we're still in the first jhana, but we can experience all of those things
Mm-hmm.
because we're beginning to intentionally make sure that we're not putting our awareness on where is the boundary between the body and the air,
Mm-hmm.
between the arm and the air. We're recognizing that that's indistinct, that boundary is faded away. It's not
Mm-hmm.
infinite space, it's just space. That's all there is. That we
Mm-hmm.
live in an environment or a space or something. We live in the sea and we don't pay much attention to it, just like the fish who's in the sea, he doesn't know he's in water until he is pulled out of water.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I guess that we don't know that we're on the planet Earth and the environment of the planet Earth, unless all of a sudden and we're in outer space. But that's not going. I mean, we're going to be in more danger in outer space than the fish is out of water. But we have to understand that there is a sea that we live in, not just a sea of air, but a sea of furniture, a sea of buildings, a sea of uh, microbes in the air, all kinds of stuff
Mm-hmm.
is going. And it literally is the sea. And so and the way that we can gain the understanding of that is by stop taking individual objects for
Mm-hmm.
perception, but rather let the whole thing sort of be there, and the consciousness is moving all around until we begin to recognize the environment that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is the quality then of separating the consciousness from perception. And this is where then the last part is when we're completely successful at making that separation between consciousness and perception, is when there's just nothing left. There's just nothing. It's just, but we know that there's nothing. But there's nothing coming in, nothing going out, nothing being processed, and it means a whole bunch of nothing, but it really is nice. It's a really nice nothing. It's nothing. And all of these things can be experienced with the first jhana without having to go through the sequence formally.
Okay.
And so just by going out, in fact, walking meditation is good like this, that you can actually fairly easy, because you're paying so much attention to what the body is doing, that all verbal thinking, we just don't have room for it. We're working too much. We're watching feet. We're watching with
Mm-hmm.
our eyes to see where we're. I mean, there's just so much happening. We don't have time to think about what we're doing anymore. We're just out doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in that regard, that's very much like second jhana,
Mm-hmm. All right.
because there's not much thinking done. There's nothing to think of much.
Mm-hmm.
We're uh, we're busy looking, observing, watching, and managing. In this case, managing an umbrella and a lid bowl. And that will take a monk into no mind state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's why the people from Zen are also big on the posture and body movements and being attentive to those and performing them in a certain manner.
Yes, this is actually what we mean. The language, the word is used is called restraint. That the monks will learn
Okay.
to restrain themselves, so we don't let the mind wander around. We restrain the mind, and in this state, because the mind is so strong, that we can restrain it even from taking any new objects.
Mm-hmm.
And by not taking any objects, we can go into a state of not talking at all, just just observing, just noting, not labeling. There's a different kind of noting. If we're labeling, then we're back into talking. But it's good that you're beginning to experience these things. So I would say keep going at that.
Mm-hmm.
Keep that practice up. Begin to watch the gaps.
Mm-hmm. Right now,
That's
those.
the key.
Right now, I don't know if I've noticed the gaps, but I noticed like a hard cut between the frames. Sometimes when one sense stops from one, like when seeing stops, and when seeing another thing, where maybe feeling or hearing comes. And I also notice how the quality of mind. So there's the knowing mind that kind of knows these sensations, and the quality can change a lot. So it quite between frames quite abruptly it can have a like kind of a qualitative change in the mind, and you can notice that wait a minute, just a moment ago the mind was completely different, now it's something else. And it's a bit it can be a bit disconcerting, but yeah, I'm getting more accustomed to it. But it kind of breaks up that feeling of solidity. So,
The Buddha had something to say about that. I
okay.
think I mentioned it before. It's in the Anguttara in the Ones. I'm not familiar with which verse it is, but he says, "The mind, O monks, is fast. It is so fast I don't even have an analogy for it." Now, when the Buddha can't come up with an analogy for how fast the mind is, that means that it's pretty fast, faster than anything else we know. And you're just pointing that out.
Hmm.
The mind's doing this, and then it's doing this.
Hmm.
How did it
Yeah,
jump from there to there?
yeah, and I had a bit of this observer identity, but yeah, the observer is, I can see how it is constructed. I think you need to see more of it to kind of finally accept it, or intuitively. But yeah, there were like gaps in even in the observer. And okay, I'm not the observer. There is, yeah.
Right. We're not always the observer. Right. Sometimes it's on and sometimes it's off.
Hmm.
In fact, you could say that people are generally not even aware of it at all until they start practicing sati to start waking
Hmm.
up. And what is then waking up is that observer.
Hmm.
And that we don't expect the observer to be there all the time. This is why it's referred to as unremitting, in the sense that, yeah, it goes away,
Keeps coming back.
but coming soon, it's coming back.
In theaters near you.
Guess which theater is so near? That is so cool. Yes, coming back, is coming back. And so that sati, or that waking up, is actually the waking up. But wait a minute, I can watch what's going on here. Because before that, for instance, we are that thought. Now
Mhm.
we're the observer of that thought. Or before I was feeling, I'm angry.
Mhm.
Waking up, and now I'm not the anger, I'm the observer of anger. So look at that. That self is moving around, isn't it?
Yeah.
At one point it's a thought, now it's a feeling, now it's an observer. And the longer it spends as an observer, the better, more clear we'll be able to see
Mhm.
that and what else is happening. So that's the whole point, is to
Mhm.
wake up, or let us go into observer mode. Or another way of talking about it is, let's come out of the instinctual behavior that is so easy to fall into, and wake up this frontal cortex Let's put the big supercomputer in gear and let it do its job of watching what the reptilian brain in the back is doing. And so this is this in fact is showing that consciousness is dependently arising from here to there. It's sometimes in the back of the brain, sometimes it's up front, sometimes it's in feeling, sometimes it's in thought, sometimes it's in sense object.
Mm-hmm.
The more we're capable of managing these sense objects, then the easier it will be to see that things are constantly changing, constantly at basically that we're living in a sea, a huge environment that is constantly in motion, but that we stop frame or we freeze it by perceiving it.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're not perceiving it, we let that flow go on and it almost is overwhelming. There is just so much sensory input happening all the time. We recognize we can't keep track of it all. We just can't. There's just so much happening. And you don't have to be out in the woods like I am to understand that. I mean, there's just anywhere you are, there's always
Mm-hmm.
a trillion more things that are happening that we could possibly actually note or pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not our job to do that or even catalog it. That's just sort of the awe or the awe
Mm-hmm.
inspiring result of not attaching to anything in particular. And people will fall into that state quite naturally in the sense of sometimes it happens with a sunset, or sometimes it happens as a vista, like people will go to the Grand Canyon or Niagara Falls or something like that, and they're overwhelmed with all of the input. Like when they're looking at a sunset, nobody's actually looking at the sun itself setting,
Mm-hmm.
but they look at the beautiful, glorious clouds and the sunshine and the way that the light plays, and it's just a huge, giant magic show. And by beginning to take in all of that stuff, we go into a state of awe, just like literally overwhelmed with the sensation, and that's just visual.
Mm-hmm.
So when we add, because of the skill, when we add all of the senses into that awe, we become completely overwhelmed with, wow, there's just so much happening all at once. But the natural way would be doing it at the Grand Canyon or the Niagara Falls. And yet, look at what so many people are doing. They're getting their cell phone out. I'm going to take a picture of it, thinking that the photograph of this situation will be awe-inspiring. They can show it to all of their friends, and the friends are not inspired by a photo. No, you need that bit. You need the widescreen, the literally
Yeah.
really wide screen of reality. And we have that available when we can get the mind focused and steady and stable. And so this is part of that the sensations that we allow that to bring on a state of wow, isn't this so overwhelmingly nice? And so this is, and we start or we can practice that with these little techniques that I've told you about. The first starting with trying to read something and listen to something else at the same time to start watching consciousness move back and forth, and then eventually getting to the point of intentionally taking no object
Mm-hmm.
that I'm seeing. In fact, the language is called gazing.
Mm-hmm.
Gazing is not looking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, looking means looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Gazing means just not focusing on anything, but just taking in all of it.
Mm-hmm. They talked about this at the Zen dojo when giving instructions. They said eyes open, seeing but not looking. So just
You see?
Yeah.
Yes, that's what the Zen thing is teaching, is actually giving this as instruction to beginners, and the beginners don't have a clue about what they're talking about. It's only when we have a foundation of our practice that we
Hmm.
can talk about the Ticca Samuppada at down at this level,
Hmm.
because we're actually talking about perception and sankara and how we're not going to be creating much of an internal image, but
Hmm.
but that internal representation has so much data in it and so little processing in it that it's almost overwhelming. It is overwhelming. You just become literally whelmed. And also the trick is that we're not processing much. The perception is doing very little, and it's not
Mhm.
digging in the past to get old data. Oh, I remember how this sunset used to look. We're not doing any of that. We're just letting this one come in
Mhm.
great amount of data. So, and still, it's intermittent. Still, there's that consciousness that goes on and off and on and off and on and off at about 10 frames or more a second. So study well, look closely, investigate, and you can see that gap. So before you could see that you could see this and that. Now what you're going to do is you're going to see this, and before that happens, you're going to look at that gap in between.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. To see that this is a drop and this is a drop, and it's not a stream. It doesn't stream from one to the other. That
Uh-huh.
is individual frames that we have in the mind, just like the movies.
Mhm. And actually, I was, yeah, work on that, and it was actually inspiring when I first saw it, because when we're meditating, we're kind of trying like to focus on the raw experience, and sometimes the mind kind of tells, "Oh, what's the value with this?" But when you see it, oh, maybe I'm wrong about my whole perception of reality. Okay, there is quite some value in just watching the raw sensate experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was also thinking how this actually makes sense with how we understand physical reality with the neurons, because the neurons fire on and off. They're not firing all the time. So it doesn't make sense to have something
Bingo!
continuous. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. That's the whole idea then, is that in fact we can go down to the point of talking about it in the sense of quantum.
Mm-hmm.
That we know electrons will move from valence to valence and eventually can get kicked out depending
Mm-hmm.
upon an amount of energy. But it takes a certain threshold. Let
Mm-hmm.
us call it 100% for just whatever. And from this one to this one, if it has 98%, it doesn't go.
Mm-hmm.
If it's got 114%, it goes, and sorry about the 14. But
Yeah.
you either come up to it or you don't.
Mm-hmm.
All right, it's either can you climb on top of that ledge or not. That's the whole point. And so there's a threshold there. And that quantum then is in the photons. There's quantums of energy. We have
Mm-hmm.
quantums of all. But from that point, you could actually say that the human brain that developed in that physical environment
Mm-hmm.
is also going to have that quantum technique of firing. That's a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful thing. Thanks for telling me about that. Of course, I've heard that before, but it never made of the connection. But yes,
Okay.
even the mind works in a quantum way,
Mm-hmm.
which has this on and off quality to it that we're talking about. So even the neuroscientists, they understand this,
Mm-hmm.
that we're not always there. That sometimes somewhere in that tenth of a second we're on, and sometimes part of it we're not there.
Yeah, it's really wonderful that we can keep this intricate machine going with linear. Oh, actually, unconscious activity is parallel, but the conscious activity is just linear. It's simply linear. And it's wonderful that we can kind of keep this going with the types of processing, and just with the linear processing, one thing at a time, that we can experience this. It's remarkable.
There's two things with that we've got to pay attention to, and that is that the human body in its environment is absolutely marvelous.
Mhm.
It's unbelievably complicated. It itself, the body and the mind itself, is far more complicated than we could understand how complicated it is.
Yeah.
It's quite a marvel. All right. And on the other side of the coin, the same coin, is that the human body is woefully inadequate
Yeah.
compared to what we would want it to be. The
Mhm.
human mind, I mean, I'm not nearly as smart as I think I am. Which leaves us with Descartes. I think, therefore I am, was completely wrong. Better to say, I think, therefore I think I am. But really what's going on, I think, therefore I think that I can think better than I really can think.
Yeah, that's usually the case.
Mm-hmm. And so we have both ends of that. Is one is the human body and the human being and mind is absolutely marvelous, but it's still not what we try to imagine it to be.
Mhm.
So we need to find a way of seeing the marvelousness that it is, but also keep track of the fact that it's off half the time.
Mhm.
It's not a functioning. Sorry, neurons fire, and then they stop firing, and then they fire again, unremittingly, but they're not there constantly. And we have this concept of everything is constant. No, things are not constant. Everything is up and down, intermittent, arising and falling, everything, cause and effect. And one of the things that they have, um, actually, the physics was going after the question, answering the question, why is the speed of light actually the speed of light?
Mhm.
And under what conditions, etc. Because you probably know that the speed of light is not constant. For instance, you know about water, that the speed of light in water is not the same as it is in air. Therefore, if you put a
Okay.
pencil, it will look bent
Mhm.
in the water because of the distortion, and that distortion has to do with the speed of light. Also, you've heard, I don't know what it would be in your country, but in English, or excuse me, in American, with miles per hour, I've got them, all of them down. I've memorized that one time when I was really into it. But the speed in air is lower than the speed in outer space, and the speed
Mhm.
in outer space is also lower than it is in an absolute vacuum. But they don't
Okay.
know what it would be like if it was in a vacuum that was so much vacuum that even space itself was missing. That part we don't know. What would the speed of light be if the speed of light could be measured when it was no longer bound by space?
Mhm. Yeah, but
Right,
what
try
does
to.
speed mean outside of space? We.
Exactly right. Now we're getting down to it. What you're really asking is, what is the speed of causality?
Mhm.
What is the speed of causality? In other words, if we can measure light in a wave, then what causes the waving?
Mhm.
If it goes that way, why didn't it keep going? Why did it turn around and come back like this? Why did it have to go up and down or in ripples? And
Mhm.
what's controlling that? This is where we're getting down to the idea of causality, which is much faster than any camera.
Mhm.
Why? Because the camera itself would have to be a series of causalities.
Mhm.
Even down the wire, when we're actually, whatever length of the wire it is, that there's going to be causality all the way down that
Mhm.
wire to get the one electron from one end to the other, or to get
Mhm.
them to bump each other until one pops
Mhm.
out. There is so much causality going on, so that means that actually at the speed of light, that proves that the causality is much, much faster. And yet it's still at a quantum.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is quantumized, which basically we can come back to the point is that if you've got a cascading dominoes,
Mm-hmm.
then the cause effect is that one domino hits the other domino. That domino then falls over, and in the process, it hits another domino,
Or
and then that
multiple dominoes.
or this one domino can hit several dominoes, and then some of the dominoes it hits will go on to hit other dominoes, and some dominoes that it hits will just fall and not hit anything. Okay, so it gets really complex by that. But this is what we're looking at is the causality or the cause and effect is that when one domino hits the other, that's the cause for the second domino to
Mm-hmm.
fall. But while it's falling, now it becomes the cause in a chain reaction to the next domino falling. And we live in a whole sea of that. That's happening all the time with every molecule. Every molecule is bouncing around with every other molecule at such a high rate. And even inside those molecules themselves, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just, when we understand it intellectually, then we can see how we can, in fact, become overwhelmed with all the stuff that's happening because there really is that much happening. Trillions and trillions of things are happening right here, right now, every every trillionth of a trillionth of a second. A lot of stuff going on. But now we're just using that in a conceptualized way of just talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, can we get the mind into the state to experience that? And the answer is, yeah, we've got a few techniques, right? We can play with that and start working with it so that we can get ourselves into that state of awe, into that state of wonder,
Mm-hmm.
by not paying particular attention to anything and just stop processing and stop trying to make sense out of it and just let it flood in. Sort of like a really, really broadband receiver, if you know what I mean. Where, yeah, we're listening to like 1,000 radio stations all at one time, but we're not trying to follow or listen to any of them. We're just listening to this noise and being overwhelmed by all of it. It's just, I don't know how to talk about it. I think you get the idea of it.
Yeah, no concept will do it justice. But yeah, I get it. I can get it even more, but yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, go play with these things and experience, and I'd like to hear about it when you call again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quite an interesting topic.
Okay. Do you have any questions or anything?
No, I think I'm good.
Well, remember, at the end of all of this, there's just nothing there. All right. Well, we'll see you. Thanks for calling. I've really enjoyed our talk.
Me too. See you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.